Georgia's defensive tackle picture is getting really heated about who's going to be the guy, and you look up and down that sideline and you still had guys like Justin Fields there, nation's #2 outside linebacker Adam Anderson, players left and right, and even there's some 2020s of all things, Hannah, that are already starting to look at Georgia, and they're starting to go, you know, what's that little emoji like that right there? They're starting to think, am I going to be the first commitment for Georgia in the class of 2020? Those words have already been spoken around Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall.
Well, fans, joining on the conversation all show long. Lockwood here says, Sintel with the fade. I see you, sir. So, yeah, your haircut does look good. Give us any comments that you want, questions. We'll try to answer them throughout the entire show. But you mentioned him. You mentioned both of them. Who we're going to be talking about today is Cade Mays and Luke Ford. Let's start with Cade, okay? This is a guy who's committed to Tennessee. His dad played football at Tennessee. Tennessee legacy, okay, through and through. Jeff. Is this a player that Georgia thinks they can just go out and get anyone that they want? You know, 5-star offensive tackle from Knoxville. Yeah. Is Georgia just walking around like, oh, I'll take you?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like we were talking in our pre-show meeting about like High School Musical or something like that. And Georgia is just the prettiest girl in school right now, and she's walking down there going, yeah, you. Well, yeah, now you as well. But I mean, it's like, for instance, with Cade Mays, he's the nation's #2 offensive tackle. He's a huge legacy for Tennessee. Tennessee's top recruit in their class. And all of a sudden, like 2 weeks, Georgia has become a contender for him. And it was really initiated by the Mays family. They're like, hey, I want to see about Georgia now, especially because Tennessee was imploding inside. And then you've got a guy like Cade Mays who, even though he's the nation's #2 offensive tackle, might not even be a tackle at Georgia, might be a right tackle, might be a guard. That's where Georgia's recruiting class is trending, where they're looking at a team, a rival like Tennessee, and they're poaching their top recruit really late in the game. And the thing to watch here is with Cade, he's going to make his decision on December the 20th. His last official visit, as it's slated right now, is going to be the University of Georgia. And that last visit is always the one to watch.
Something else with Cade, and this surprises me because I thought Georgia was only going to take 4 players on the offensive line this season. They already have Owen Condon, Warren Erickson. They're recruiting heavily. Jamari Salyer, Trey Hill. Both of those players, UGA is their #1. So where does Cade Mays fit in all of this? And is this just kind of like, oh, we want to go after him because he's a big name when they already have so many guys that they want on the offensive line?
It's kind of like movie night at the Sintel household when the neighbors' kids are over and you're in the big couch and everybody says, scooch over, I want to make some room.
Yeah.
Well, they're just going to make some room for the nation's #2 offensive tackle. And it's a situation where the option is now there. You got to remember Georgia's class look kind of fit. You know, they had Trey Hill as an option, Jamari Salyer as an option, Owen Condon, the big 6'7" kid from Oklahoma, Warren Erickson, who's one of the nation's top centers. That seemed like the class. And then when Georgia was getting greedy, they were going after Daniel Fa'alele, the 6'9" Australian from IMG Academy, more of a project. But then they're like, upgrade, kind of like, you know, a cell phone upgrade or something like that. Cade Mays comes into the picture, #16 overall recruit in the country, really good friends with Jamari Salyer, and obviously Georgia is now right and squarely in the mix with Cade Mays as well.
So we've seen what the Justin Fields effect can do. We're going to talk more about that later in the show, but it's kind of happening with Cade Mays too. So players that are actually committed to UGA and players that are not committed to UGA are kind of recruiting Cade Mays, so I've heard. Yeah. They're trying to make like this mega team. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a squad. I mean, Hannah, it is a squad. You've got guys like Owen Condon, who we mentioned a minute ago. He's calling, he's reaching out. Warren Erickson's talking to him. Those are the commitments, but it's almost like a down-low OG type thing going on where a guy like Salyer, who's considering Clemson and Georgia as well. And then you've got Cade Mays, who most insiders think will choose between Georgia or Clemson as well. He will kind of leave Tennessee behind, especially since they don't really have a lot of coaching uncertainty right there. Cade Mays wants to win, and Salyer is a pivot point, I think, for Georgia and Cade Mays, because if Salyer, who's going to make his commitment on December the 15th, if he does choose Georgia, that is a huge chip for Georgia to recruit Cade Mays, who will ironically be taking his official visit a couple of days after that. And if Georgia does have Jamari Salyer as a committed recruit, that is going to be like a 345-pound magnet trying to lure Cade Mays, another 5-star, to join Georgia. And it's almost like we have to re-rate these numbers. There was a point where I thought Georgia was going to get 3 5-stars. There's a point where I thought Georgia was going to get 4 5-stars. Now Georgia is even in the ballpark to land 5 false 5-stars and maybe even 6 5-stars, which is what Alabama did last year with their remarkable recruiting class of a year ago.
Wow, and we can't forget, though, that Cade is committed to Tennessee. And, Jeff, what does this say about the Tennessee program that a kid like Cade Mays, whose father played at Tennessee, he has Tennessee blood running through him. He's from Knoxville, Tennessee. What does this say about that program that Cade is reopening his recruiting, per se?
That's a great question, Hannah. And to me, what you have here is an example of his dad played for Tennessee, but his dad played for a different Tennessee.
Yeah.
And not the Tennessee right now that's having a pillow fight with Southern Miss. There's coaching uncertainty everywhere, and I stressed earlier, Cade Mays wants to win. And then you've got a situation there with who he could potentially play with, and where Georgia's stacking up all these guys, nation's #1 running back, nation's #1 quarterback. He sees an enviable situation there at Georgia, and Sam Pittman can recruit. I mean, Sam Pittman can recruit his jockey. I mean, he can recruit his dockers off, man. That guy is a great recruiter. It seems like everybody that talks to him loves talking to him. He's an engaging guy. He's hugging all the moms. The moms are smiling big. Sam Pittman just has that charm, that Arkansas charm he puts on all these recruits, and guys love playing for him. And I know Cade Mays was smiling a lot at Georgia this weekend.
All right, my last question for you about Cade Mays before we move on. How can Georgia have a potential edge over him moving forward over Tennessee?
Yeah, I think Tennessee, especially the way their coaching situation is going, I think that Tennessee stuff's out of the picture now for Cade Mays. And what I'm going to look at here is if Salyer does commit to Georgia on December the 15th, and a lot of other pieces are also going to be in place, you've got a situation with Georgia where they're not picking the carcass of Florida for their top players. They're going after Tennessee's top players. Alontae Taylor is another guy as well. Cade Mays is a guy. And I think if Salyer comes home to Georgia, I would probably think that Mays will also end up with him. And that's a situation where Georgia's got 18 commitments. They maybe have 6, 7 spots left. I think they make room for Cade Mays. They make room for a 5-star, and maybe they take one less linebacker. They might take one less player at another spot in order to make room for a big-time talent in Cade Mays.
All right, let's move on to Luke Ford, either the #1 or #2 tight end in the nation, depending on where you get your recruiting information from. He was originally committed to Arkansas. Now he's down between Alabama and Georgia. He was there this weekend. What are your thoughts on Luke Ford?
Well, I know this. Luke Ford told me in the opening, and out in Oregon, he said, if Justin Fields chooses Georgia, then I will probably go to Georgia. Now, to be fair, he also said if Justin Fields chooses Alabama, I will probably go to Alabama. But the cards have kind of changed there a little bit with Luke Ford, because Alabama's top tight end target from the junior college ranks decommitted, and Alabama only plans to take one tight end now. So Luke Ford, while he's the #1 target left on the board for Georgia at tight end, Luke Ford is no longer the #1 target left at Alabama. And I know this, the Ford family has told me many times that they feel really good about their shot at Georgia. They feel really good about their fit at Georgia. They have a lot of things going on. He took an extended unofficial visit. Luke Ford still plans to come back for an official visit, likely in January. He could either make his decision at the Army All-American game or on National Signing Day Part 2. That would be the old school signing day in February. And he really enjoyed himself at Georgia, no doubt about that.
So there's that Justin Fields effect that we were talking about. But what about his brother Noah? So his brother Noah has more Georgia gear than I think some of the players on the team have. He's decked out in Georgia gear. He had a Georgia hat on this weekend at the game. What does that tell you?
Smiling big. I mean, Hannah, he had his Georgia hat on. His dad had a Georgia hat on, and his dad, great American serviceman, former Apache chopper pilot.
Wow.
That's why he's playing in the U.S. Army All-American game. But it seems like Noah Ford. I want everybody that's watching right now to do a quick inventory. If you got more than 4 or 5 Georgia hats anywhere in your closet, hat rack, or whatever, say, Jeff, I passed the hat test. Because I think Noah Ford has about 5 or 6 Georgia hats already. That's his older brother. He's still in college. He could be a preferred walk-on if Georgia was to try and close both of the Ford brothers right there. And one other thing I'll say about Luke Ford is Luke Ford is a tough dude. He had a situation earlier this year, Hannah, where week 1, his collarbone was a little achy, and he's like, what's wrong with that? Let me play another week. What's wrong with that? He goes and gets it checked out. He keeps letting the weeks go by. The doctor says, well, Luke, you've broken your collarbone.
Oh, no big deal.
And he misses about maybe 5 weeks, something like that. Comes back and plays in the last playoff game. Luke Ford, Nation's number 2 tight end, about 6'6.5", 245 pounds. Pretty good speed, better blocker, crazy blocker, also great hands. Yeah, I think he would be one of the remaining 6 on the board for Georgia that has an offer and a spot in this class no matter what.
Well, you've got a ton of people that passed the hat test here. We've got a ton of comments coming in. You wanted it. John Wilson says I. Neil Landon Jackson, Blake Smith, Dennis Parker. I mean, I can go on and on. Look at all these coming out. Robert Hunk also commented on your hair, so your haircut does look good.
I'm going to say this. If you live in the great state of Illinois and you have 5 Georgia hats and your brother's being recruited by Georgia, you should feel pretty good about the chances right there.
All right, a lot of people are with you. Okay, we're not done talking about tight ends, though. If not Ford, Georgia's still looking to take a tight end into this class. Tommy Trimble, Kyle Pitts. So Tommy Trimble's a guy, he went to Johns Creek. He's made it known, though, that Notre Dame is his number 1 place right now. But Kyle Pitts, on the other hand, he's from outside of Philly, and he's got a lot of Georgia ties, though. Same high school as current UGA defensive back Mark Webb. He's friends with DeAndre Swift. So what do you think about those 2 tight ends if Luke Ford, or maybe maybe it's a thing where they're still looking at them too?
Well, I tell you what, first of all, this lady's done her homework. You knew about Kyle Pitts, you knew about Mark Webb, you knew about that connection right there. Kyle Pitts is committed to Florida right now, and I think, given the state of things in that program, I think he is still going to wind up at Florida. I think Georgia has John Fitzpatrick out of Marist already committed at tight end, and then I think they're saving that last spot for Luke Ford. A lot of time was spent with the Ford family in Kirby Smart's office over the weekend. They got to tour the Georgia campus. They already had a great visit back in the summer. I got to hang out with Justin Fields and Kieras Jackson. I would think that Tommy Trimble is probably like insurance for anything weird happening with Luke Ford or John Fitzpatrick. And then you've got a guy like Kyle Pitts who might be plan E or plan F for Georgia. I'm thinking right now that you can kind of expect Luke Ford, barring anything weird happening, I would expect Luke Ford to be in the Georgia class when all's said and done.
Jeff Sintel, I'm Hannah Chalker. Thanks so much for joining us on Before the Hedges, the Georgia recruiting show here. We have all the latest information, so you're going to want to come back every week. But we're not done yet. We're talking about the 2018 class. Let's take a step ahead and look ahead to 2019. You've made the prediction that you think Georgia's going to have the #1 recruiting class in 2019. It's kind of shaping up to be that way. I mean, Georgia's really taking the reins here in 2018. Look what they're doing at 2019. They already have 7 commits. So what are your thoughts? Do you still stick by it that you think they're going to have the #1 class?
I think so, and you got to remember, you look at that already, and if you need your screen to be stretched out really wide, or one of those wide screens to see all those stars. Nolan Smith, that's a 5-star. He's taking lots of visits. Don't worry, DawgNation. He just wants to get a lot of stamps. He just wants to get a lot of frequent flyer miles, see a lot of big SEC venues. He went at LSU, Alabama. You got Jaden Hazelwood, who's been at Oklahoma in recent weeks. He's also been at Alabama, LSU last week. I mean, Jaden Hazelwood is 1,000% dog. He made that up when after Justin Fields committed to Georgia. He had made every home game Georgia had this year except the one last week. He says, rest easy, DawgNation. Everybody knows where my heart is. Nothing wrong with looking around and eating some different stadium-sized food. And, you know, there's some appealing things in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I know.
There's a few.
There's a few. And, I mean, that list is just going to get better. And maybe the big thing about that list, though, is you've got a lot of homegrowns on there. Georgia has elite talent. You know, you got to put an asterisk by Nolan Smith because he plays in Florida, but he's from Savannah as well. One of Georgia's 3 5-stars for the class, and Owen Popo. The thoughts there. Georgia's in a good place right now with Owen Popo. Georgia made his final top 3. Look for his decision to come maybe first week of January. That would be 4 5-stars already. And you got to remember, those boys have another 16, 18 months before they would even think about signing. So the way you have a #1 class is you have that sort of depth already, 15 months outside of the signing days.
Well, you also need to put an asterisk next to Dominic Blaylock, the wide receiver out of Walton High School. Mookie Blaylock's son. A lot of you guys know that name. He had a long career in the NBA. So what are your thoughts on him being committed to UGA?
Well, #1, great fit there. Kirby Smart really took a personal interest in recruiting. And this is more of just like Wall Street, Michael Douglas, greed is good, because Georgia already has Jaden Hazelwood, the nation's #1 wide receiver for 2019. And they're not done there. They go and get Dominic Blaylock out of Walton High. Look at unbeaten Walton High here. 10-0. They won their region. They got a big playoff game coming up. Dominic Blaylock even missed a couple of games. Look at him out of the Wildcat formation right there. Blaylock is the nation's #2 wide receiver for 2019. A pair of those 5 stars, and that's kind of like the white whale for Georgia. They've never gotten those big top 5 receivers, even with all the great recruiting Kirby Smart has done lately. They add Dominic Blaylock. He scores a lot of touchdowns, one of those sneaky fast slot receivers. The thing I love about him more than anything else is he adds a human element to his game. The kid loves his mom's milkshakes. His mom basically makes him a milkshake on request every day of his life. So anybody who want to be a 5-star mom out there, you make your son a milkshake upon request. They need to make a Hallmark card for something like that. Mom, you always make my milkshakes. Oh, and by the way, he's a 5-star prospect and going to catch a lot of passes and a lot of touchdowns from Justin Fields.
I'm going to need to know what's in those milkshakes because something's working. All right, well, we've talked about Cade Mays, Luke Ford, and a million other names on today's show, but we need one more from you. Who's next on your list?
Wow. You got to think about the defensive tackle spot. I know a lot of our readers on DawgNation, Hannah, are really worried about like what's going on with defensive tackle. They've got Devontae Wyatt, the guy who signed last year, didn't qualify, is going to spend 1 semester in junior college. They've got Tramel Walthor. But Georgia's not done there. They had their eyes on a pair of 4-star defensive tackles. Those guys were in Athens over the weekend. One of those is the aforementioned Rick Sandage. Maybe a name you guys don't hear enough and you guys are going to read about a lot in the next few days on DawgNation.com is a gentleman by the name of Jordan Davis. He's out of North Carolina as well. 6'6", about 305, 310 pounds. Looked very chummy on the sidelines with Trey Scott this weekend. Him and Rick Sandage were hanging out, having a good time. It seems like everybody has brightest futures and everybody's got to wear shades for everything that's happening right now with Georgia recruiting. Big man Jordan Davis is a guy to think about there. Rick Sandage might also be a guy. And you guys will remember from our previous 2 shows that there's also Robert Cooper, 6'2.5", 355-pound Robert Cooper, another kind of priority target for Georgia at defensive tackle. I might think that you might see Jordan Davis and Robert Cooper in that class, maybe more so than Rick Sandage, although Rick Sandage is considered kind of a lean right now to South Carolina. He's got some family connections there to South Carolina. But Rick Sandage had a good time, and he saw the Bulldogs defeat the South Carolina Gamecocks over the weekend as well.
You mentioned Sandage, so you just answered a lot of people's questions on our Facebook Live feed. Fans, this is the time in the show. We're going to answer your questions. I'm trying to scroll back through, but if you have a question that you sent us earlier and want a refresh, put it at the top of the feed. Go ahead and send that over. Jason Lambert is asking about KJ Henry.
Wow, KJ Henry. I think he's going to take his official visit this week to South Carolina. That's the school I think that really has the least chance, really not a really good chance of landing KJ Henry. And Georgia, sources I hear from tell me that Georgia's in a really good spot there with KJ Henry as well. His name is associated a lot with Clemson. His name is also associated a lot with Virginia Tech. But Georgia could add another elite pass rusher. And, you know, maybe one of these predictions that people maybe don't want to hear is there's just simply going to not be enough room at the end for all these players that want to play for Georgia right now. There's going to be a big-time 4-star prospect, maybe an inside linebacker, maybe an outside linebacker, maybe a wide receiver, athlete type, that the Bulldogs just don't have room, and they're going to have to think, well, didn't hit our quota at this position for 2018, and we'll attack that with what's shaping up to be a top-rated class in 2019.
Lockwood is asking, what about Barmore?
Christian Barmore, another name to think about there. He's out of Pennsylvania. The thing with him is I think Georgia's class might already be almost ready to come out of the oven by the time he starts making all of his big visits. He's a guy that was a guard last year, like a 2-star, 3-star guard in Pennsylvania. You want to talk about Pennsylvania ties and Pennsylvania names. Well, the Webb family and the Swift family are already telling Christian Barmore, another Philadelphia product, about everything gold and everything great at Georgia and how the players are getting better, the practice environment is great, and you're playing for the top-ranked team in the country right now as well. Christian Barmore is a guy I think might come down. He's got Georgia in his top 5, which will be his final 5. But the fact that he's not taking his official visits or any visits whatsoever until after his season is ended, I mean, Georgia's in a great spot. They could get Cooper. They could get Cooper, they could get Davis. If you had to ask me right now where Georgia ends up at tackle for 2018, I think the chances right now at least are better for Davis and then Cooper as opposed to Mr. Barmore.
Nate Thomas is asking, what is the update, if any, on Justin Fields' broken hand? Broken finger.
Broken finger. Well, first of all, shout out to the person that made that Halloween costume. There was a young kid from I think the Kennesaw, Marietta area who went as Justin Fields for Halloween. And he had the headband, the red headband. He had the jersey with Fields' name on the back. But the crowning touch of his costume was he had a finger split like on his finger, which replicated that injury to the teeth. I mean, lots of Georgia commits, lots of non-Georgia commits, and this Justin Fields himself had quite a laugh about that on social media. Justin had his senior night last week. Harrison did qualify for the playoffs despite missing Justin for the last 2 games. He just got his hand up in a big brace right now, and I think the thing to look for with that cast is it should come off late December, and that might give Justin a chance to rehab and get back to play in the Under Armour All-American game. The things I'm hearing right now is he might sign on the early signing period, but it is yet to be determined whether or not he will enroll early in January or whether he will enroll later on in the year.
Okay, fans, keep your comments coming in. Neil Landon Jackson's asking about Tyson Campbell.
Tyson Campbell, he was supposed to make a visit this weekend. He was about the only person that didn't make a visit to the big Georgia-South Carolina game. 5-star cornerback, nation's number 3 cornerback. I think he's a player that Georgia definitely has a spot in the class. And, you know, as we start doing these shows, I'm going to teach you some terms. There's the committable offer, which is good. Which means it's got maybe an expiration date attached to it. There's an offer, which has so many strings attached to it. There's being recruited, which is basically getting a lot of mail without any contact. But I think maybe the biggest thing you want, the biggest status you want, is a spot in the class. And that means Georgia has maybe 6 or 7 spots remaining. And I know Georgia, with Tyson Campbell's prowess, is the #1 defensive back on the board. I know Georgia is holding a spot in the class for Tyson Campbell. I hear a lot of reports that it's basically now down to between Georgia and Alabama. I hear a lot that Georgia is actually the clubhouse leader right now for Tyson Campbell. You guys were down in Jacksonville at one of our meetings, our DawgNation Invasion meetings. I told a few fans that as well. I think Georgia's in a really good spot now with Tyson Campbell, and I think Campbell is a guy that will be in that class if he wants to be.
All right, we've got a few more minutes for questions. Joel Kelly is asking about Isaac Taylor Stewart.
Isaac Taylor Stewart, really fast dude out of California. Really fast dude out of California. He is probably, if Tyson Campbell isn't the fastest man in the land, then it would be probably Isaac Taylor Stewart. Mr. Stewart is another big-time cornerback. He's off the West Coast. I think if things didn't work out with Tyson Campbell, maybe Stewart becomes a bigger option. He's about to name a Final 5 or favorites list that's coming up. I think that should drop this week. And, you know, everybody asks me a lot, what's up with Tyreek Johnson? Well, I think what's up with Tyreek Johnson is Georgia, kind of the theme of our discussion today here, Hannah. Georgia has upgraded from maybe a player that's a 4-star DB, maybe a top 80, top 100 player, and now they're going after top 40, top 50 players. Georgia's just the hot team right now. It's the hottest Georgia football has been simultaneously in recruiting and on the field since 1982, back before nobody knew what stars meant in recruiting. It's a good time to be recruiting for Georgia, no doubt about it.
Wayne Carroll wants to know, who will Georgia's last defensive commit for 2018?
The last defensive commitment. Well, I'm gonna string this one along. Tyson Campbell is a guy that I don't think that will announce until National Signing Day. That's going to be the first Wednesday in February, and he might be the only guy left on defense for Georgia in 2018. So I would think a guy like Tyson Campbell is a guy. That's a pretty good question, by the way. But if you're going to ask me right now here in mid-November where I think the last defensive signee is, not just commitment will be, I think that might be a guy like Tyson Campbell, because right now he has said that he wants to decide on signing day.
Chris Brooks has another good question. Will Fields and Zeus come in early? I know we talked about this on our show last week, but just refresh us. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Zeus is coming in early, and pardon me 20 seconds here. Zeus went bonkers last week against their huge rival. This is their Egg Bowl this is the Egg Bowl for Zamir White in Scotland County.
Dig, everybody.
No, they played Richmond, and Zamir White, who's averaging 13.9 yards a carry coming in, had 3 touchdowns in the first quarter, ran for 310 yards, had 5 touchdowns in all in a 59-47, I think 62-47 win. The biggest game of the year for Scotland County and those Scotland County Scots of all things in Richmond. facing Richmond. That's in North Carolina. Zamir White, who's known for career days, went over the 7,000 career yard mark. Everybody asks me this on social media all the time and on our DawgNation.com forum message board. I'm going to lay it to you straight. When Zamir White arrives in Georgia, I think he will either be the 1A or the 1B back at Georgia. He's simply that good, and he will get about 15 to 20 carries per game. He will slide into one of those marquee slots that would be vacated by the graduation of Sony Michel and Nick Chubb. He'll be paired up with great backs like DeAndre Swift, Elijah Holyfield, Brian Herrien. Georgia's running game is in very good hands with Zamir White.
Chad Donaldson wants to know, what about JUCO kids?
JUCO kids. Well, I guess Georgia is looking for guys now that can help them for 4 years. I think the JUCO guy that's on their mind right now more than anyone else is a guy like Devontae Wyatt. He's the guy that was a 2017 signee, didn't qualify out of the gate and had to spend one semester in junior college in Kansas. I spoke to him recently. He's still loving Georgia, still wanting to make those Bs and get qualified. Can't wait to get to Georgia. Devontae Wyatt, remember, he was a guy that was found at running back. He played running back for Towers High last year. His Devontae White story was a great story. He was wearing a pair of Air Force Ones. It was at track practice. He's like, "Coach, I can run as fast as those guys out there." He said, "Show me." He did. Georgia offered him. He's a 4'7", 4'8" guy at about 300 pounds. Going to be one of those knifing defensive tackles. Devontae Wyatt was a huge fan favorite for fans last year in the 2017 class.
Very last question we're going to take. Matt Wilder wants to know, who is a recruit that's completely off the radar?
Completely off the radar. Well, I'm going to throw one name out there that it's kind of the talk of high school football in Georgia right now, and that guy's name is Logan Cash. Logan Cash was a guy at a Winder Barrow. That guy's probably, a 3-wood away from Athens, Georgia. He was an unofficial visitor to Athens this weekend. Now, I don't think he doesn't have an offer yet from Georgia. He's a 2019 prospect. He's about 6'3", he's about 255. Hannah, he has 21 sacks so far during his junior year. Runs about a 4.8 in the 40. He can bench press 310 pounds. He can squat about 500 pounds. He's got a power clean over 300 pounds as well. But he had 5 sacks in a game earlier this year. If you look at that film, he's doing everything that anybody would be coached up to do. He's destroying guys. Kind of looks like Bobby Boucher on his highlight film on a lot of his tackles. Logan Cash is a guy that definitely need to think about for the future.
Okay, so 18 commits for the 2018 class, 7 commits for the 2019 class. Final thoughts on this week in Bulldog recruiting?
This week in Georgia recruiting. Well, you've got the Auburn game coming up on Saturday. That's something to think about right there. You've got a lot of prospects on the board, and it's going to be pretty funny because everybody's looking for Cade Mays interviews right now. I don't know if Cade Mays is going to do much more media or if all media going forward until he makes his decision over maybe the next 40 days. You got names like Luke Ford, and if you guys check the intel this week, there are 2 players that we will drop into the intel blog this week on DawgNation.com that have named Georgia as their leader, and Georgia is still their leader even coming after that out of that Georgia-South Carolina game.
Does your report have the tidbit that Luke Ford was named after Luke Skywalker?
It does. One of my early reports is because I love that stuff. Whenever you can figure out something besides the normal jock stuff, the normal football stuff. I mean, his dad actually tried to name him Luke Skywalker Ford, and then the mom threw the flag on that one. She said, "Yeah, not happening here." You look at Luke Ford hanging out with Justin Fields. Sometimes he laughs and he says, "That's my BFF. That's me and Justin." Georgia fans would like to see those 2 guys in huddles in close proximity 3 or 4 years down the line.
All right, well, we talked about Luke Ford, Cade Mays, a million other names today. So if you're just now joining, once we get off live here, just go back and rewatch it. And Jeff, where can everybody find out more Georgia recruiting information?
DawgNation.com. The Centel's Intel blog goes up every morning. Somewhere around 10:30 every morning. You've also got at JeffCentel.com. Tuesday, tomorrow, we'll be at Marlowe's Tavern in Roswell. Myself and Brandon Adams will be kissing babies, throwing out T-shirts.
Signing autographs, taking pictures.
I'll be signing autographs for Brandon. Brandon is the showrunner, the flagship of our site, no doubt about that. But we're going to do all that. And then Wednesday night, you got Facebook Live, about 8:30 every Facebook Live every Wednesday night. We've been doing this for about 60, 70 weeks now. Have a lot of fun with you guys out there. And we'll see you on DawgNation.com.
You know, I'm still trying to get to the status where people are asking me for my autograph. So that's all I'm saying. All right, everybody. Jeff Sintel, I'm Hannah Chalker. Thanks so much for watching this week's Before the Hedges, excuse me. We'll check you next week right here.